Hello and welcome to the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachie Avil. Joining me today, and Happy New Year. I haven't seen you two since we've ticked over into January. Chris Macpherson, hello. I see you've got the collared shirt. That can only mean you spent a day at the members at the SCG. How have you been enjoying your new start to 2026?
Well, it's been a wonderful start to 2026. It's been full of sport, football included, so I certainly can't complain, and Happy New Year right back to you, Lachie.
Thank you. Poletti, hello. How are you? How are you enjoying your start to the year?
Well, I was enjoying it until you decided to overthrow my coup attempt by just taking it back for yourself, the hosting duties of this podcast. But, you know, I mean, it is what it is. No, look, I mean, I don't subscribe to that new year, new me, all that sort of stuff. It's another day. I don't really subscribe to that. So I'm just chugging along the same as I always would.
Fair enough. It's a good excuse for a party, though. Hope you all enjoyed listening at home. It's our first little Monday A-League recap of the new year. Hope to have you back for plenty more throughout. But to jump into today's storylines, I want to kick us off with the game up in Redcliffe between the Brisbane Roar and the Wellington Phoenix. And I think, you know, the term peak A-League, Chris, gets thrown around, and often in the context of the wild and the wacky and the unpredictable, which is an endearing term, right? It's something that we say with affection about our league, the Australian League. But when I think about the best of what the A-League can be, I think that the game for Brisbane against Wellington was pretty much as good as the A-League gets. Obviously, we've seen the Raw take a game to the Sunshine Coast so far this year, and they've taken one to Redcliffe now as well. It was announced as a sellout. There definitely were some patches of empty stands, but I think that's just how the ticketing world kind of works nowadays. But, you know, teams who really, really cared on the pitch, passionate supporters in the stands, goals, red cards, a big chon. It kind of had just so much of what you want a football game to be, and the passion was there. And we've talked a lot about passion with the Brisbane Roar in the last couple of weeks and months, really, but it just felt like everyone cared so much. It was a great display of the entertainment value of the A-League in really just like that pure football, without being ironic in any way, that pure football sense.
It certainly was, yeah. I think entertainment is a great word for it in terms of what they got dished up here in Redcliffe. And again, you know, I could go off on a very long tangent here. We know how much I love a sideshow about, you know, fit-for-purpose sizes of stadiums, but we'll leave that alone for now. It was great to see. It was great to see a reasonably full stadium, which is a nice change for Brisbane Roar. And it was great to see some entertaining football. It had, you know, everything that drama and, you know, stories need. It had, you know, negatives with red cards. It had positives with lots of goals. Unfortunately, they weren't necessarily for the home side, but it was undoubtedly an emotional roller coaster for all in attendance. And we had some enthralling football and some pretty, as you said, peak A-League moments, with some of the goals being, you know, the long range and those sorts of pieces as well, just with some, you know, Wellington playing Wellington football, which we know can either come off in spades or bite them in the backside in spades.
Yeah, absolutely. And Poletti, honestly, the funniest stat out of this whole game is that down to 10 men for, what was it, an hour of the game after probably their best player for the season so far, and Carlo Armiento gets sent off. That was their first clean sheet of the season. Like, make that make any sense?
I mean, Chiefy, you know, got emotional after the game in his post-game press conference. You know, called it, you know, probably the best victory he's ever had as a coach. Was, you know, struggling at points to hold back the tears because he was so emotional about it. And I mean, clean sheet, down to 10 for almost 60 minutes. Not only that, but you put 2 goals past Brisbane after you go down to 10. I don't know, something's happening in the A-League this season, because that's at least 3 times I can think of where a team has gone down to 10 or less and won the game. Like, you don't usually see that, like, particularly when there's such a lengthy time on the board, you know, with that player advantage for the side that's eventually gone on to lose the game. Auckland have been on both sides of that stat now. Brisbane on the wrong side of that stat as well. It's absolutely baffling, but honestly, full credit to Wellington. They absolutely dug in once they realised they had to, and I think all the players got on the same page. I saw a few weeks ago, Chiefy, talked about how, he sort of tried to change things up at halftime and then they immediately conceded because the players weren't on the same page in terms of the instructions coming out of the break. Some were sitting deeper, some were still playing high. This time it looked like after coming out of the halftime break, every single player that was on the field or came off the bench were on the exact same page and they knew they had a job to do. And look, they're obviously not going to play down a player every single week, but I think there's enough there if you're a Wellington supporter to go, maybe Chiefy can actually turn this season around. Maybe, we've got a shot at making a late run to the finals, particularly given how compact the table still is in that middle of the pack. Yeah,
and for me, the table represents exactly where the teams are at in terms of just this competition being tight. And you rock up. It's always been said about the A-League, but you rock up on any given day and anyone can win. But it feels like this season has exemplified that the most. And Poletti's right, Chris, that, it was an amazing team effort from Wellington, particularly to hold in the game and hold firm when you lose that player. But especially going forward, and for me, this is just a one-man show. Eze, the miraculous signing that they've plucked out of obscurity, really, and brought him to the A-League. It's his, target man play to get the ball for the first goal, and he manages to create the breakaway, skips past two, and then feeds off for, the opportunity that becomes the Nagasawa goal as well. He's been just a shining light for Wellington so far this season.
He certainly has, yeah. Like, as you say, sort of plucked from nowhere and has come to from obscurity to absolute shining light for Wellington, and it feels like he's just getting better week in, week out. And you pair him with the likes of the Nazarene and the goal that he created for Nagasawa as well, and yeah, he seems to be at the crux of everything good that's happening for the Phoenix. But I also want to give some flowers to their defensive unit. They had 33% of the ball in this game. They cleared the ball more than 50 times from their back lines, like 54, I think it was, clearances in this game. Like, that is a huge shift. And, I know, when you have a look at the Newcastle and Auckland game, it was similar. But, football at the end of the day is quite a simple game. If your defence can get in and grift and graft like that, it goes a long way to making it a lot easier, even when you don't have a lot of the ball for those, offensive stars and the guys at the front of the attack to shine.
Yeah, and I think he didn't still have a perfect game, but definitely young Eamon McCarron in goal for the Phoenix, definitely his best showing, I think, so far. He stood up in some big moments and helped the Phoenix get over the line. Poletti, Brisbane, again, they've been central to so much conversation. I think you really can just put some games down to one-offs, like everything that Michael Valkanis is trying to do. And I loved getting the kind of shots every 15, 20 minutes of him going berserk in the box that was apparently right next to the commentary booth as well. I'm sure that was fun for the guys calling the game. But, he seemed to be in constant communication. I'm sure it was him that dragged Tosin Bility before the halfway point as well of the match. But everything he's trying to do in terms of instilling the passion and making them fight and wanting to, just represent Queensland, represent that region in a good way. It feels like it's building. We talked last week about the whole, double up red card and the line between disrespect and passion. But all that fight, everything he wants his football team to do was still there. And feels like this is just one of those games.
Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to just write it off, is kind of like, okay, let's just forget everything that happened in that game and move on. It doesn't exist. Erase it from their grey matter, so to speak. I think it's probably, what Michael Valkanis will be trying to do. I'm sure there's some Greek mythology about, erasing things from your brain that he can lean into there. But we saw it at the start of the season. Things were going well. He was busting out the Greek mythology in press conferences. He had a smile on his face. Everything was going well. But then as soon as the going got tough, he sort of he started to crack under the pressure a little bit for mine. Whether that be some of his behaviour in press conferences, the double yellow card last week with Alex King. I don't know. It just feels like things are starting to get to him a little bit. And so if he can sort of, turn that around, I think Brisbane are going to be a serious contender this season, but it also has the potential to unravel very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say he's losing anything, because I think he's always been there. But I agree that his style of management is conducive to a team that's winning. You know what I mean? Like everything he says and everything he does and the story he presents and the way he manages his team is built around winning. And when the winning falls apart, then, the question about the style of football comes. We've seen it with Ange. He's a really big Australian example. If you're not winning the games, well, then people will start to pick apart your methods, and you'll say, oh, well, if we're going to lose, at least I'd rather lose playing attacking football. Those comments will come when he starts to lose games. So it's about that dip and how they manage that dip. For me, as to whether it'll determine if they're a successful team this year. But one thing that they will have to manage, Chris, as well, is the absence of Lucas Harrington, who played his final game for the club before departing for the MLS to Colorado Rapids. This is a deal that's been done before he turned 18, so obviously just waiting for that to tick over and finish his schooling as well towards the back end of 2025. But he's now off. He was called one of Australia's best defensive talents by their former coach, Ruben Zadkovic. That line gets thrown around a lot, and people seem to add talent, opportunity, future prospect or whatever. Pretty sure he just said straight up he's one of Australia's best defenders. So that was a lot of praise coming from Zadkovic to a young player, and he's come in and he's really set the A-League alight, and I'm sure he'll go to do big things in the US.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing how he goes over there. Obviously, we've got a cast of a few over in the MLS now, so to see another one join them is going to be really exciting. Just on Valkanis really quickly, I'm just loving some of these personalities we've got in the managerial roles. We've got, the pantomime villain in Valkanis. We've got the eccentric, I'm not quite sure what you'd call Adam Griffiths on any given day. We've got the lovable battler in Chiefy, as Poletti touched on before, the emotion we saw. It's wonderful. It's like, I've got friends who are, casual at best football and A-League fans who are now maybe not watching games, but tuning into press conferences. Like, it's just wild.
Yeah, Adam Griffiths sure is getting a bit of run, and I'm sure Valkanis is doing the rounds now as well. It is worth noting, obviously, we're heading into January now, so the transfers are going to start to pop up. I think another rumour that has been very strong is Alex Bonatig. We don't have a Wanderers game in this little set here, so I thought I'd just pop it in. But he's set to be off to the Portland Timbers, I think, in the US as well, who is Finn Sermon's team, former Wellington Phoenix player, and they found great success with him. So another international club dipping back into the A-League well for their recruits, which is really, really good to see. Now, Poletti, moving on, and another theme that came out of this weekend, funnily enough, out of all the good football that we've seen, two of the worst individual performances from sides, and this isn't just us saying this is club legend Alex Bross calling Sydney FC, one of those halves against Melbourne City on Saturday night, the worst that he'd ever seen from Sydney in the A-League, which now goes back 21 years. That's a pretty significant statement, and obviously Adelaide United, the game that we've just come off watching, completely capitulating inside the first half hour and dishing up 3 goals. And obviously there are reasons for this, and we'll get onto that. But it's remarkable. We can have all these themes about the positivity of the football, but these two clubs really just didn't turn up this week.
Well, before we get into the negative, we'll keep the positivity train going. Harrison Devonish-Mears, such a great performance in goal for Sydney FC on Saturday night. He's done his stocks absolutely no harm with that performance, coming up strong every time he was asked to, help keep his side the 0-0 draw and take a point away from, a tough trip to Melbourne that hasn't exactly, AAMI Park hasn't exactly been a happy hunting ground for the Sky Blues as of late, or the Jacaranda Purples as to what they were wearing on Saturday night. But look, Alex, I understand Alex Brosk. He's paid to have an opinion, which is why he's on Channel 10. He's on the broadcast. He's paid to have an opinion. He's a club legend. He's entitled to his thoughts. I've definitely watched some pretty dire halves of football from Sydney FC, and I'm pretty sure Alex Brosk played in 1 or 2 of those games. So, I mean, maybe maybe he's just looking at it slightly differently because he played in them as opposed to actually seeing them. But I reckon, there's, I don't think it's the worst that, I've ever seen Sydney FC play. And then Adelaide, gosh, where do you even start with Adelaide, to be perfectly honest? Like, they just weren't there from the get-go. Like, imagine turning up to your home ground for nothing. I can't I can't get my head around it. It's I know they've got no defensive depth, and Kikianis obviously went down with a train knock earlier this week, so very late out there for Adelaide, which meant they've had I think it was an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old in center of the defense.
Yeah. So Stanisic, who is playing his third game, his second start, he already had a horrific timeout in his starting debut, gave away a penalty and another goal on top. He was the handball that gave the Mariners their first goal in this game. And then Phyllis, who was on debut as well. So this is obviously not their fault, right? They've been thrown into the cauldron, and it's a problem that was highlighted pre-season by Jacob, right, Poletti, the lack of defensive depth that they brought in the transfer window. This was a problem that they had last season. They have failed to adapt to that, failed to bring in the required recruits, and all of a sudden Bart Vriens gets injured, Kikianis takes a little knock, he's unable to play, and you're forced to play these guys. And they even switched to a 3 at the back at halftime because it just wasn't working so bad, and it doesn't set you up for success when this is something that clearly can happen, especially for Bart Vriens. We've seen him have injuries before. This is a completely predictable scenario.
Yeah, 100% it was. Look, I think what they're going to need to do, if they're not thinking about it already, is they're going to have a look at what Australian defensive free agents are available, and they're going to have to get to work in the transfer window over the next couple of weeks. And it opens, I think it's January 14, it opens. And they're going to have to sign players, January 14 and probably have them ready to go. I don't even know what game they play that round. I think they play on the Saturday, so they're going to have them ready to go January 17 because otherwise, the season might start to get to the point of unsalvageable for Adelaide. Like, I know their visa spots are filled up. Maybe, A-League clubs love a mutual termination, so maybe they can convince someone to leave, so they can look around.
Selma's barely played for them.
I know, but I mean, we know contracts in the A-League are guaranteed, so it's one of those. It's one of those situations where unless you can convince them to leave because they've got something else lined up, and Club B doesn't want to pay Adelaide United the transfer fee. I mean, good. It's tough.
It's almost just cut them a check, isn't it? Here's the rest of your salary. Get out of town. Can we afford to do that?
But then that goes on to the salary cap, right? So they can't even then use the money they would have saved. And so, particularly when we know the APL are trying to encourage clubs to cut their budgets, shall we say, on players. I think they're going to look pretty harshly on any salary cap overages, and so you're going to end up in a situation where do you risk it for 5th place in a first week knockout? Probably not.
So what you're suggesting, Poletti, is that Adelaide United need to get themselves in the marketing department of these players and somehow market them somewhere else without giving them game time.
Brown paper bags?
You just do the football manager offer to other clubs button, or use in between or whatever. Look, I've been thinking a little about this dynamic, Chris, lately because of how even the league is, right? And I think everyone automatically leaps to the fact that that's a positive. And I'm not saying that it isn't a positive, but I've been considering the alternative, and I can see some strengths and weaknesses in both of those ideas. And one of the weaknesses of the system that we have, and this goes away from the financial difficulties that the league have, but being in a salary capped league in a football global ecosystem that doesn't play by those rules puts us at disadvantages, right? So unlike the other major codes in Australia, the AFL have a mid-season rookie draft, but it's not comparable. We have a fully fledged transfer window. So we want to buy and sell players. The MLS happens a lot in January because they play over a calendar year. We lose a lot of players, but by the nature of the salary cap, if you're prepping well and complete at the start of the season, then that doesn't leave you room to grow as well. If you get, the first 3-4 months into the season, all of a sudden you're Adelaide, okay, our salary cap didn't really allow us potentially to make as many changes in that defensive department as we would have wanted, granted that we're already bringing back a Craig Goodwin or something like that. Then That's what January is there for. But because of the salary cap, not even the fact that they probably don't have the money to spend anyway, but even if they did, the salary cap is going to restrict their ability to do that. So as much as we're equalizing the league, we're actually lowering the potential. I mean, obviously we're lowering the potential of some of these clubs, but even just for those little minor improvements that seem so obvious, clubs won't be able to do them.
Yeah, 100%. And, there's a number of things about the way the salary cap cross-pollinating with the transfer window impacts clubs that even, we tend to see most of the action in this January transfer window, as you talked about. We see maybe some Aussies coming back on loan from clubs overseas that they've served at, and they either come back to their own club or, we're hearing some rumours of a couple of players who've left the A-League in the last 6 to 18 months and are now looking back at the A-League in terms of getting game time and these sorts of pieces and making sure that they're, featuring in lineups. But it tends to be, even if you look at an A-League to A-League situation, unless you're a low-value player, essentially, you need a club who has salary cap room to bring you in. And if you're not getting game time, but you're on a decent salary at the club you're leaving, you're not going to get similar money somewhere else. So there's so many things that tie hands of clubs in these situations, as you say. So whilst it is a wonderful equaliser and, it's almost a necessary evil for the broader sporting public here in Australia because, we aren't adept and comfortable with the fact that, I follow a club that might, once every 12 years make the finals and once every 20 years make a grand final or something like this in a 10-team or 12-team league, as the league's been in recent years. There's fans that aren't prepared to support that. And so because of that, we bring a salary cap in terms of trying to level it. Still doesn't quite work. You tend to see most of the same teams up there, although this year we're seeing some more parity. So I think I'm just creating more questions about it, not answers for you, Lachie. But I certainly see where you're coming from and agree. I don't know that we can completely do away with it. Do we look to a soft cap situation a little bit more, where that money could then be where it's penalised over and above, like they have in some of the American sports? That could then be distributed to some of the lesser clubs. That's the closest thing, I guess, to a hybrid situation. But we're forever going to be in this situation where we're kind of grating against the system that we operate in.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. So as you're listening to this podcast, Steve Rosic has started his gig officially as the CEO of the A-Leagues. I'd love to hear what he thinks about the future of the salary cap. Again, financial issues of the league aside, I don't think Australian football can reach its potential with a salary cap. Now, I think I agree with you. You probably don't get rid of it completely, but you also have to remember that it was brought in by Football Australia as a sustainability measure, primarily in terms of just keeping these clubs alive and not necessarily competitive balance. That is just one of the benefits of it. And if you make it some system where there is a soft cap, obviously the PFA are going to want their minimum salary cap. But at the moment, that's like 95% of the hard cap, right? Oh, sorry, not the hard cap, but the total cap. And so what if it's, okay, the soft cap stays where it is, the minimum spend, but you're increasing the top spend so the bigger clubs can spend more, or there's a luxury tax. If you go above it, then some of this money feeds down into other clubs, things like that. I think there's things we can do. And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole completely because we could sit here for an hour and a half and yes, very, very long periods of time and talk about that in depth. But Poletti, with Adelaide, with their transfer issues, Sydney do not face those same issues. They have a loaded squad. They have depth. I don't know how much you lean into we're missing Joe Lolly and he can't just create goals on his own from the right wing, because apart from that, they got Paul Ocon back. Even Devonish Mears, who was criticised a lot throughout last season, has really made that keeping spot his own. I thought he had a brilliant game, was probably the player of the match on Saturday night. The rest of that team is there, and that is a quality team, even without Joe Lolly.
It is, but Joe Lolly is also a completely different beast entirely, as we've seen that they've really struggled at points throughout his absence this season for injury, and it makes more and more sense as the weeks go on why Sydney FC didn't want to let him go to Perth, because heaven forbid he's not there at all this season. Tale might be on the hot seat, and look, there's absolutely quality at Sydney FC, but we also saw it in this game a little bit where some of the players just weren't able to create chances. They were getting into the right positions, they were getting into the attacking third, but then they were failing with their last touch or their second to last touch. They just weren't able to to make things happen on the few occasions they were able to get forward. Whereas, if that's Joe Lolly on the edge of some of those chances, surely Sydney FC walk away with at least a goal and Devon Ishmael stands on his head again. And, Sydney FC pull a 1-0 escape job, hit and run straight out of Melbourne. Yeah, I mean, if Joe Lolly's going down, do we know how long Sydney have said, he might be out for this time? Are we looking at another 3 to 4 weeks? Are we looking at a month or two?
Yeah, I'm not sure. It was obviously quick initially, and then he redid it. Yeah.
If they're looking at 2 to 3 weeks and he's going to be back, then they should be fine. If they're looking at a month or two, maybe they have to get to work in January. But again, it's that case of how much space do they have in the cap? Can they, how do they utilize it?
Abel Wallity is a genuine quality player to come off the bench. Surely there is enough depth in that Sydney FC squad to be the quality, but obviously, you're not going to replace a person of Joe Lolly's quality, right? For me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, he's the best player in the league at the moment. You can't just pluck those out, right? So you got to make do. But surely that shouldn't just mean that the team falls apart without him.
It shouldn't, but we've seen A-League teams fall apart in the past that have had, I don't think over-reliance is the right word, but, as soon as they lose their marquee player, they go down, all right? And so I think Sydney FC are teetering dangerously close to that. They got Campazano in, who hasn't really kicked on, to be their lead striker, to work with Joe Lolly. And he's given me flashbacks to one of the seasons they had Costa Barbarouses, where he was expected to play the 9 role, and for whatever reason he just couldn't finish at Sydney FC, and he got bugger all goals, right? I'm getting flashbacks to that sort of season, and maybe it's because they're playing at Leichhardt again, and that's where Barbarouses struggled a lot in that season. But I don't know, it's so tough because this is Sydney FC. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know this is bad podcasting, but I'm just.
But I think Poletti, I think we're missing something here too. And take the Joe Lolly piece into account. Sydney is sitting second in the league, right? That is an outcome of the competitive nature of over the last few weeks. Sides like Melbourne Victory and Newcastle starting to string some wins together. That's the only reason they're sitting second. Go back and have a look at their run of games in recent weeks and have a look. They lost. So they had a scoreless draw where they didn't create a lot. They lost 2-0 to Newcastle. They had that week off with the Auckland game that was postponed. I think before that they had a 1-0 win over in Perth that was far from convincing. They beat the Mariners again 2-1. Not super convincing, deserved winners, but Central Coast were really bad and Sydney were probably poor. And then the Derby loss as well. This is starting to become a bit of a pattern, and it's probably smothered over by the fact that they're still sitting second on the ladder. I think there's probably a little bit more underlying here. To your point, Lachie, on paper, this team should be sitting second and should be a strong second or top 2 team. Games aren't played on paper. They're getting away with some things, I think, in a couple of these results, and that's keeping them alive as well as some of the other results. I'm a little concerned about what Sydney are doing at the moment, without Joe Lolly most notably, but just in general.
Yeah, fair assessment, I think. And look, we said with Brisbane as well, and every team, you're never going to have, especially in this era of an A-League where everything is so tight, as we've said, you're never going to have a clean run. So it is about managing those down periods. How can you shorten them so they don't drag on too long, and how can you motivate your squad to get back to winning ways quickly, so those losing performances don't multiply, and all of a sudden you find yourself towards the bottom. Chris, one of the peculiarities of football and the way we talk about it is we see these two games with Mariners smashing the Adelaide United team, and we talk about Adelaide because that feels like the more interesting story, which I feel like it actually is. But are we underselling the Mariners? I feel like they won't get as much credit as they probably deserve for this win. They have been a team that is down on their luck. We're waiting probably around 9-10 days from when you're listening until some of these reinforcements are due to arrive. They're a team that desperately needs them, but this must be a pretty morale-boosting win to know that that's coming so quickly off a decisive victory like this.
Yeah, I think Central Coast sniffed some blood in the water, and hats off to them. They capitalised on it, because it's all well and good to have other teams play poorly, but if you don't capitalise, as we just talked about with some of the others, then you don't walk away with a convincing win like this, irrespective. So, they played well. They took their opportunities. I think what we're seeing from Sabitnor is really impressive. I think he's really taking some leaps forward in his career. And I think there's some good glimpses there for Central Coast. But as we know, the biggest Achilles heel of the Mariners over the last 2 seasons has been consistency. They throw in one of these, and then next week, and I haven't quite looked that far ahead yet as to their next game, but next week they turn up and they look like they don't know their teammates. So I guess that's what I'm sure Warren Moon, Mariners fans, and even myself, I like to see these smaller market clubs performing well with some consistency, and we've seen a bit of that this year with a couple of them, but the Mariners have been, probably fair to say, at best a roller coaster with a lot of dips so far this season. So if we can continue to see that development of, Newell, even Brantman, that run that, he took on. We've seen times this year where the Mariners haven't backed themselves and they look to lay that pass off rather than try and cut through the defence. There's lots of positives there, but again, they're infrequent. They brought them all together on this night. Can they do it again, for a couple of games in a row? Because as we know, with where the league sits, you string together 3 games and all of a sudden you're going from 11th to, 5th or 6th. So the Jets have done it over the last little bit. So can the Mariners do it now is probably the question.
And then Poletti, the same praise probably can't be given to the opposite side of Sydney's match, Melbourne City. It feels, obviously the narrative around them coming off this Asian run, going into a streak of 7 games at home for them at Amy Park. This was the period where they were expected to start picking up those points and make their charge towards the top of the table. That hasn't happened. It feels like another missed opportunity. It feels like it was a game they should have won, and Devonish Mears' goal we've touched on was very good as well. It wasn't quite like some of the other games where they've maybe been just the poorer team. But they're missing their opportunities now to a certain point where we're actually wondering if they're going to have enough space to do it. And obviously it's the A-League. You finish top 6, you get a crack at finals. But in terms of what I truly believe Aurelia Vidmar has challenged this team to do in create something groundbreaking, coming off winning a championship, doing so well in the Asian Champions League Elite as well. They're running out of time to make a charge towards the top of the table in this nice little window with no travel that they have.
Yeah, because it's only going to get worse for them, particularly, as is expected. It's like, a 94% chance they go through the next round or something like that. They go through the round of 16.
Something like that.
So, yeah, it's, they win that tie, and then all of a sudden, they're off to Saudi Arabia for 1, 2, potentially 3 games. And, that's a good couple of weeks right there where you've got to fit games in and around that where, essentially they're going to be playing every 3 days from, pending qualification to the next round for the rest of the season. So taking advantage of this stretch is absolutely critical. And, it's the same for MacArthur as well. They've got to take advantage of it, even though they're playing, every few days. They've got to take advantage of it. Look, I don't quite know what Vidmar was going for in this game. There was the under-23 squad come out. They said that they didn't release Caputo, but then Caputo was on the bench. Like I don't quite know what Vidmar was going for here. Like maybe he's happy with the 0-0 result. I haven't seen the press conference yet.
Surely not. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I was just getting vibes from when Ante Uris tried to do the same thing a couple of weeks ago at Sydney FC. They went away to Wellington and he set up like he would have been happy with the 0-0 based on his team selection. I don't know. I just get the same sort of vibes here, even though City definitely created more of the chances. And on another day, they probably win that game 3-0, to be perfectly honest. I don't know. Maybe we can just put it down to one of those games where they just couldn't find a way past the goalkeeper, and much like this Brisbane result, we write it off. But the problem is that Melbourne City have had more of these sort of results in them this season than they have in the past. And if, as you said, they start to stack up and they're dropping 2 points here and 2 points there, all of a sudden you're sitting in 9th, 7 points out of the top 6 with a month and a half to go. Yeah, you got to play like 10 games in that time, but you've also got to travel to Saudi Arabia. So, it's going to be very difficult for City to turn it around, particularly given that I remember, talking to Vidmar in preseason after their loss to RPL Leichhardt in the Australia Cup, where they basically said they made the decision to play the VPL side to essentially give a better chance at Champions League and A-League commitments, because they didn't have the squad depth that they were going to have last season. So yeah, just one of those things where it's like they've admitted that they don't have as much squad depth and they're struggling now. What's it going to be like when they're playing every 3 days and traveling all around the world?
Yeah, for sure. It's a tight schedule. And look, I think they were really poor in that loss to Perth Glory in the last round. And then the other games in that winless run of 4, you got the late winner from Victory, the Grimaldi shot, the draw against MacArthur, and then this one here against Sydney. They weren't as bad, but you can only say it's one of those games so many times before it becomes a pattern, right? And it's starting to be 2 and 3 for City now. So they have to pick up their gear. They're in 9th, which is obviously only 1 point outside the 6 because everything is so tight. But they are outside of the 6. Chris, the final game for us today in this little kind of clump that we've got, thankfully, I think we have a Monday night and a Tuesday night fixture, and then we kind of go back to the usual weekend programming, which is much nicer for the routines here at Round Ball Australia. But Victory versus Perth, and, Perth, we were just talking about it. They beat City a couple of days ago. They stayed in Melbourne and they came out hot against this Melbourne Victory side. And we were talking in the WhatsApp at the time, like it was actually kind of unsettling to see Perth Glory like be away from home, be it in Melbourne, and come out of the gate so hot and score that opening goal and just be a really, really good football side. Like I forget who had the chance, but Jack Zunkin made a really, really good save to keep it at just 1-0. Like if that goes in and it's 2, that the phase of the game completely changes. And it was really more of the same brilliance from Juan Mata, 4 assists in 4 games now from him, that really launched Victory back into the game. They seem to be clicking a lot more in recent weeks than they did at the start of the season. Juan Mata looks a different player compared to what we saw last year. It's drawing a lot of comparisons to how he's being used by Arthur Dillis in this setup compared to what Staj did with him last season. It just feels like everything is clicking for the Victory at the moment. Of course, the return of Nishan Volupale from injury helped as well. But also for the Perth perspective, this should be a disappointing loss. And we've said it a couple of times in the last week, but these games hurt Perth because they know they're in them. They know that they've been competitive. They know they're a good football side. And they're just competing in good football games now, which is a real positive.
Yeah, well, I think that's the underlying thing for Perth. Maybe 6 weeks ago we might have seen this Perth side that would have been happy with a 1-goal loss on the road in Melbourne on the back of a long week away. But I think Adam Griffiths and his crew will think this is a chance that got away from them. As you said, I think they had a goal scratched off. They missed an opportunity. There was some times there, and I wasn't watching this one live, but I was getting it recapped to me while I was doing some stuff for my other channel and working through. And you're sitting there going, hang on, Perth Glory's up 2-0 at one point before that got scratched off. And I was getting excited about 20 minutes in because I'm like, we're going to get another Adam Griffiths press conference here. It's going to go off the chain and we're going to be up and about. I think credit to Melbourne Victory. Obviously, they had their backs against the wall early against, as you say, a pretty decent football side, a Perth side that it feels like have started to found a bit more of an identity. But again, when you've got Juan Mata doing Juan Mata things like he's been doing the last few games, like it's hard to stop. He is at his best. I had some messages from a couple of English friends because some Barmy Army attendants obviously got Juan Mata back in the headlines in England. And all of a sudden they're watching A-League games again. Anything that gets casual fans are all about this. That's 2 different things in the one episode. But they're just like, he's still got it. Like he could come back and play in England. I said, I think you're getting a little bit carried away. But yes, he does still have some amazing ability. I'm sure, with the way Alan Stajic is still finding silver linings in the Wanderers season, I'm sure he'd have a reason for why it is that he wasn't performing last year and that he was actually doing wonderful things with him. But anyway, enough laying the boot into Staj. I think, Perth disappointed with letting letting points slip away again. Victory be very happy. The Dillis, this is a side that a few weeks ago was, stone motherless last. They've put a bit of a run together now and they're starting to look like the side that Melbourne Victory should be with their budget and resources and players they've got on the paddock. And it was a good game to go back and recap and watch after the fact. And I think again, another opportunity for Melbourne Victory to keep building what they're doing.
I think there was an interesting forced experiment from Victory as well. in the midfield, you got Denny Jonro, who was the partners to Louis Dorigo, who I think Louis has been a really inspired pickup from Victory. He's slotted into the base of that midfield so well. Obviously, Geordie Valadon is his usual partner. He's away with the under-23s, which we'll talk more about on Thursday, just before they start their Asian Cup campaign. But him and Valadon have been solid. Jonro did start at the 10 for the first couple of games of the season, and to be fair, was exceptional. But given the form that Juan Mata is in his position, he's undroppable completely as long as he's fit to go, which he seems to be. Apparently, his GPS numbers are the best at the club, so he can run for days, it seems. So you got Juan up in the 10. And then Jean Rowe, obviously with Valadon away, has been partnering Dorigo, and I think you can see exactly the dilemma that Dillis has with this midfield kind of 4 core players. The turnover that he gave away for the goal is just kind of inexcusable to lose possession like that in your defensive third. He's just not that kind of player. He's just, and it's nothing against him because his better position is further up the field. He's not used to having that responsibility to hold onto the ball in those key defensive areas. But he was exposed there. So I think if anything as well, he's a great player. If you can get him further forward, he's great, but then you're going to expose yourself without the 2 at the back. So it's tough for Arthur Dillis. He's got that choice to make. And unfortunately, as quality as Jean Rowe is, I think, unfortunately for him, his best position for the team is on the bench when everyone is starting and available. So it's a very fascinating dilemma. But these are some of the hard calls that Dillis has had to make. And undoubtedly, Poletti, it's having a positive impact on the team because they're winning games. The vibe at Amy Park is back up a little bit again. It feels, especially after the Wellington game as well, plenty of people saying, I saw specific comments going around, this feels like the Victory of old. Whether that's just because they were winning by significant margins, who knows? But they're playing good football. They're winning games. And to be fair, the whole scoring goals thing, it's like, well, we think back to the Tony Popovich era. You didn't usually get clumps of goals like that. You didn't really get Victory putting someone to the sword like they did against Wellington. And obviously they conceded the late goal as well, maybe a little bit softer than they would have liked to bring it back to 3-2. But before then, they had responded and they did pretty well against this Perth side.
Yeah, no, they absolutely did. And I mean, I think that's all you need, right? Like, feel good vibes can paper over a lot of cracks that are going on. Like, it was just a month and a half ago we were talking about how, Dillis is under pressure, things are rotten at the club, the fans want him out, the fans aren't turning up, the fans don't care. Everyone's sort of become a little bit, laissez-faire when it comes to supporting the Victory. And then all of a sudden they just build a couple of results together, capped off by a late derby winner and, a thrashing of Wellington. And suddenly, the good times are back in Melbourne. Melbourne boys are number 1 again. And I mean, you were at the, was it the derby where the Northern Terrace, or what's left of the Northern Terrace, had, all those banners that basically say Melbourne boys are not number 1. And I mean, the vibe right now seems to be they're number 1 again. It's amazing what a couple of good results can do, as you said. And, the vibes just seem to be good in Melbourne again. And, for Arthur Dillis, the challenge now is just to keep it going. And, maybe that, some of those tough calls that you alluded to that he might have to make could make him slightly unpopular. But, 3 points are 3 points and they paper over a lot of cracks. And, if you can get back up to second, third, hell, even first on the ladder, I don't think anyone's going to care about the sort of football you're playing. Like, we've seen that with Brisbane Roar fans. They haven't cared about the sort of football that's being played. They're happy to be winning again. They're happy that, they're putting up a fight. They're putting in the effort. And, Michael Valkanis can continue to play, some dour defensive football all he wants. But if he's getting 3 points, 2 weeks out of 3, I see absolutely no reason that the Roar fans won't lap that up.
And I think some people, might even find those comments facetious, that it's like, winning games and having those vibes papers over the cracks. But you know what? If you're winning games, then you deserve to. You deserve to paper over the cracks. And exactly, it's the Michael Valkanis school of thought. It's like, well, do we get the 3 points? And I've said it many times, but I really love that just oversimplification of everything. It's like, well, we're here to win games of football. And if you win games of football, you do deserve to have the vibes kind of just swing in your favor. And I want to give him some credit as well, because one very specific footballing change I think I've seen him make. It sounds so simple in retrospect, but with the quality of Juan Mata's delivery, and specifically from open play, hitting Nikos Burgos in the head, like with a good quality delivery, he's tucked like 2 or 3 headers away in his 5 goals. So like actually using the aerial targets and using the strengths of the players that you've got. And that specific one is a good example of it. Obviously, Juan Mata's delivery is second to none. And we've seen that Burgos has been able to get on the end of them. So, credit to Dillis and the victory at the moment on a strong run. They're the clumps of little games we've got. So the ladder is, again, still pretty tight. Auckland and Sydney are still on top, and they're the 2 teams with the game in hand after they had their fixture postponed. We've got the Monday night. We're back in Macarthur for Macarthur Mondays against Auckland.
Oh, I love a Macarthur Melbourne Monday. City, let's go.
Poletti's gearing up for a Macarthur Monday, and then we got City versus Brisbane on the Tuesday night, and then we are back to regular weekend action, as I say, which will be nice. But one other little Australian story to finish on, Chris, which has been a really, really cool moment, actually. I don't know if anyone listening has been following along with AFCON, the Africa Cup of Nations, but there's a pretty cool Australian story. Obviously, no Australian players involved, obviously, by FIFA nationality or anything, but an Australian-based player, Admir Abdallah, who's been starring not in the A-League, but in the NPL Victoria. He's had a couple of amazing seasons. He won the gold medal in 2024 in the NPL men's competition, scoring a goal and a blinder of a goal as well to open the scoring against Sadio Mane's Senegal. They didn't get the job done in the end, but to have an Australian-based player over there at a tournament of that prestige, this is a continental championship, scoring a goal like that is a really cool moment. And I think it just shows as well. I know there's different tales you can take off this moment, and I'm sure Poletti will get onto about talent ID and the role that the NPL has in Australian football. But this is the second tier, maybe even the third tier now of Australian football. Someone who's playing in that competition is going and scoring goals at a competition like this.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see. As you say, it does highlight some of the talent that's there. I think it also highlights the wonderful, and we've obviously seen this with some of the A-League players, but the wonderful, woven in refugee stories that come to Australia with a lot of these, especially the Sudanese and other African players. But it's wonderful to see, as you said, he's been playing in the Victorian NPL. I think he's played for a number of clubs there. I think did he spend some time with Avondale this year in the Australian Championship as well?
He moved to Avondale for the Australian Championship, yep. Yeah,
so it is great to see. I know a number of years ago he spent a little bit of time over, I think maybe in Europe for a season. But yeah, again, it's great to see these players who are getting that opportunity going and getting themselves on the highlight reel. And as you said, didn't get the job done, but maybe, just maybe, it'll, some teams looking for diamonds in the rough in some weird and wonderful leagues around the world might just start casting their eye to the Australian Championship highlights, to some of the NPL. I mean, it's also accessible in this day and age with it all being live streamed, et cetera, with, some of yours truly's, all 3 of us, I think, on here, dulcet tones on there as well. So those worldwide competitions and commentators too, when he wants to go over there, will be available for those too, surely, Lachie.
100%. Poletti, I wonder, like, you score a goal at AFCON, whatever opinion I think European football might have on the tournament, this is a tournament with a big reputation, right? So you score a goal there, people are going to be looking at you. And when people discover that he's not playing professional football, they're going to go, let's sign him up, right? But it leads to a different question, and we're actually going to find out a lot of the answers to the question I'm about to ask you in the next month or two, being the first transfer window for the A-League after the inaugural Australian Championship. But NPL players have always had, I think, some baggage attached when being looked at for talent ID or recruitment from A-League clubs. One of the parts of the Australian Championship is to solve that issue and say, okay, yep, they're playing in their semi-pro, sometimes amateur, whatever competitions around the country. Bring the best of the best together, and then seriously, you have a platform to step up into the A-League. That gap is closing, and hopefully the Admir Abdallahs of the world are able to perform, not in AFCON, but in NPL Victoria, in the Australian Championship, and A-League quality clubs will look at them and go, they're a quality enough player to come play for my football club.
I really would hope so, because as Chris said, we all, the three of us all watch the NPL every week. We're watch, Chris in Northern New South Wales, you in Victoria, myself here for NPL New South Wales, and I try to keep across as much of Victoria as I can, because I recognise a lot of the talent, but there's only so many minutes in a day to watch football games, which does make it difficult sometimes, and that's where I'm not a huge fan of praising NPL Victoria, but that's where the Thursday night and the Monday night games that NPL Victoria put on really come in handy when there's no other football on. In the depths of winter, it makes it really easy to just sit down for 90 minutes and put on, a Melbourne Knights versus Green Gully game, or whatever, and just expose myself to a different state competition than what I watch week in, week out. But I mean, look, just Amir Abdullah, good performance, his first goal for Sudan as well. So look, this idea of the NPL not necessarily being valued by A-League teams is something that has come up a lot over the years, and I want to specifically touch on Amir Abdullah here. This from Josh Parrish on Twitter. A reminder that he trialled at Perth Glory ahead of one of the club's worst ever seasons and wasn't offered a deal. And in the immediate reply to that tweet, likewise at Western United, so this is by Football Empowerment, not by Josh Parrish, the second one. Likewise at Western United, scoring during his trial against Melbourne City and was still not offered anything. It's two A-League men's teams that have passed up someone like Amir Abdullah, who's, ripping it up at AFCON, which is, as you said, regardless of what the Europeans say, and they think the same of basically every continental tournament that isn't Copa America.
They say the same about the Asia Cup, yeah.
Exactly. Any tournament that's not the Copa America, they say the same thing about. And even then, they still sometimes say it about the Copa America if you get the wrong pundit on the wrong day, but I digress, that's a different story entirely. Quite often in the past, A-League teams just not know how to assess and value NPL talent, like, because we see this with regularity, where it's just like, oh well, why isn't such and such making the move to the A-League? And I don't know, like, I think the Australian Championship will offer a window for a lot of these players to do so, but even then, you're looking at mid-season moves, and we've just spent the first 20 minutes of this episode talking about how that might not work for Adelaide United because of salary cap concerns and, visa spots not being available and stuff like that. And, I've got a little bit more to say on that in a moment, but I want to finish this point here first, is just this idea that, I don't know, like, just, I wonder what's going on inside some of the football departments, inside some of these clubs, where they're just, I don't know, is there a level of snobbery to it where they just see the NPL as so far down that it's good for their academy talents, but that's it? Like, I don't know, like, you surely you'd think some of these A-League clubs would be talking to their academy coaches every week and going, well, who do you like on the opposition that you're looking at? Because you're seeing these players week in, week out, you're scouting on them, you're assessing them. Someone like an Alec Jurasevsky, who's never really given a shot in the A-League, someone like a Marko Jesic, who, had a good stint with Newcastle a few years ago, but never really cracked on in the A-Leagues. There's a lot of good talent down there at the NPL that I see week in, week out, and I just want to see him get a solid shot at senior football.
I think, just jumping in there, Lachie, I think one of the things that a lot of the A-League teams, and again, this is just a gut feel piece, will use is the non-success stories, the players that have come through and played a handful of games and then, reverted. And this guy probably doesn't quite fit that mold, but I look at Newcastle and a Ryan Scott. And goalkeepers are a different piece altogether quite often, I know, but those sorts of players. But then, on the counter side of that, look at what over 2 years Ben Gibson has done now at Newcastle and become quite a fixture after, standing out for Apia, and they took a chance on him at a young age and brought him in. So I think there's certainly lots of diamonds in the rough to be found. I think there's a lot of players who are cautionary tales, like Abdullah is, where they've gone and trialled with clubs who are, absolutely on the bones of their backside. And, I think of Brisbane a year or two ago, and there's a young guy out of the NPL, Bailey Wells, that went and trialled with them. And I actually think it was probably better for him at the time that he didn't get a gig there, but he came back and did really well for his club here in the NPL, Northern New South Wales. But he's a player that I look at and I go, I could probably name 7 or 8 players who started on the weekend in the A-League he would be as good as. He's not a defender, but I'm sure he could probably get a gig at Adelaide as a central defender at the moment. There are so many of these players in so many positions, and we'll talk about it off air. There's a number of them, some that have played a bit of A-League that have, either got other passports or even a couple of the Aussies now that have signed in this Oceania League. So it's great for them to be getting opportunities anywhere. One of the first ones, and it's a name that you'll know well, Poletti, is, Tas Muradakadis. These sorts of players going over there and getting another start. He's one that's been cycled in and cycled out. And there's some of those, and there's some that have just never been cycled in that I think clubs need to be keeping a bit more of an eye on. And hopefully this story of Amir Abdullah scoring at AFCON, even if it's only a few sets of eyes, gets more eyes on these competitions, because there's some wonderful footballers getting around that should be getting a full-time wage playing football.
100%. And with all the stories that go against it, you have a Harry Sawyer who, what would it be, a year and a half ago was playing for South Melbourne, toiling around in a system that really didn't allow for much for him, to be fair, and but still being very, very successful in the direct way that they wanted to play. And sure, it took him a year, but now he's equal leading. Maybe he's slightly behind now, I'm not quite sure, but very close to the top of the Golden Boot standings in the A-League, playing for Macarthur at the moment. So there are opportunities there, and obviously the benefit of the championship again is that when you have these players who are even just standing out at an NPL level, they are playing NPL standard opposition every week, and we want the professionalism of the Australian Championship to grow so that you're playing against professionals all the time. But even just having that tournament, at least you're playing the best of the best consistently. So if you can put 6 to 8 weeks together of good football against other good footballers, then I think that stands a lot more, Poletti, than just a couple of good games or even a season in the NPL where some of the quality is obviously a decent step below.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I know, speaking from first-hand experience watching NPL New South Wales, there are some absolute dire blowouts every single week. There are some not so good teams, and I think we saw that this year with the former Mount Druitt Town Rangers, who did the yo-yo between the League One men's competition and the NPL New South Wales men's competition over the last couple of years. Where they're just they were the easy beats of the competition every week and were rightly relegated down to the second division. But as we saw what NWS Spirit did this year. They went all the way to the Australian Championship, and were one of the feel good stories of the competition. But I mean, even then, you look at some of the foundation clubs, right? And some of the performers they had there. Someone like an Ali Ugla, who's had his time in the A-League, wasn't quite able to put it together for an extended period of time at different points at Macarthur. He's rumoured to be getting an opportunity again with the Mariners, and Warren Moon said in his press conference after the game against Adelaide that the Mariners have confirmed that they're going to be bringing in some attacking players in January, and we know Ali Ugla fits the bill, so that would be a good move for Ugla to get back into the A-League. Hopefully, there's many more players in this window that are getting that opportunity. And I know we talked about visa signings a little bit as well. NPL Victoria absolutely loves the Japanese player. It's the same here in New South Wales as well. Love the Japanese players, and the Japanese players love the NPL for some reason. Never quite worked out why. But it seems to be a match made in heaven, and something that Adelaide United might actually perhaps be able to take advantage of. Jacobs put in our WhatsApp group that Ayrton Andreoli got, I'll read the exact quote, got incredibly defensive when quizzed about Julian Quaital and made a suggestion there might be an option to terminate his contract. We know A-League teams love mutual termination season, so that might open up a visa spot for Adelaide to cure some of their defensive problems, so watch this space.
That is one of the most befuddling transfers in A-League history, to sign a player that you've never seen, loan him out for a year, and then he comes and even with all their issues at the moment, still can't get a game. It's going to go down in the history books as one of the worst.
You say befuddling transfer as if the A-League's not, hasn't been prone to befuddling transfers. I mean, Yongbin Chen immediately comes to mind, and is it Mario Yardell at Newcastle or something?
Mario, yeah, Super Mario. How could we forget?
There's been some good ones for sure. But that will do for this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast. Thank you for your company. Hope you've enjoyed your New Year's Eve football. Chris Macpherson, are you going back to the cricket tomorrow? Have you got more corporate boxes?
Of course. Where else would I be? Back at work? No, we'll give that another day.
Very nice. Look forward to it. Enjoy the game. Hopefully you get 3 sessions tomorrow. Poletti, thank you as well.
No, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to 90 minutes of melee ball out at Campbelltown Stadium tomorrow night.
Lovely. All right. Thank you, everyone else, for listening at home. Hopefully you've enjoyed your holiday period. Good to have you back. If this is your first episode of the new season, or the new year, I should say, obviously still the season. Continuing towards May, we've got the Women's Asian Cup in March. We've got the Men's World Cup coming up in June, July as well. It's a big year for football. Stay with us at Roundball Australia, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.